Okay, so ready for another deep dive.
Always. What are we looking at today?
Today, it's all about personal evolution, how we grow and change over time, and we've got some pretty heady stuff to unpack.
Like what?
Well, there are these notes from Divine Fusion 101,
Okay, yeah, I remember that one.
and then there's this piece called Pasted Text. It's, well, thought-provoking, to say the least.
Right.
And then to round things out, we've got this framework called the cycle of experience, expression, and choice.
That sounds familiar, but honestly, all of this is pretty abstract. Are we going to be able to pull any concrete ideas out of it?
That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we do in these deep dives. We try to make sense of these complex ideas, see how they connect, and maybe, hopefully, come away with something we can actually apply to our own lives. Ready to dive in.
Absolutely, let's do it.
So one thing that really struck me, and it kind of sets the tone for all of this, is this idea from Pasted Text about choosing a personality.
Choosing a personality, what does that even mean?
Right, like at first, I was like, wait, we can choose our personalities. But the more I thought about it, the more it kind of made sense.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break it down for me.
So the way I understand it, Pasted Text is saying that we can either cling to a fixed idea of who we are, like this rigid sense of self, or we can choose to let go of that and embrace change.
I see. So it's not so much about picking and choosing traits like from a menu, but more about how we relate to our sense of self.
Exactly. It's like, are we holding on to that fixed self, or are we willing to evolve to become something new?
And pasted text uses this term ego death to describe that process of letting go, right? It's about shedding the old to make way for the new.
That's it. And it made me think of, like, a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly.
Yeah, I get that. The caterpillar has to completely surrender to the process in order to emerge as something completely different. It can't hold on to its caterpillarness and expect to fly.
Exactly. And I think that's a powerful metaphor for personal evolution. We have to be willing to let go of who we think we are in order to become who we're meant to be,
It's definitely not easy. Letting go of that familiar sense of self can be scary.
for sure. But then I started thinking about this in relation to the cycle of experience, expression, and choice that our third source talks about. I mean, how does choosing a personality or letting go of a fixed sense of self play into that cycle?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Remember that source, the cycle of experience, expression, and choice, talks about this continuous loop. We have experiences that shape us, then we express what we've learned through our actions and creations, and then the choices we make lead to new experiences, and so on.
Right, I remember that. But I'm still not quite seeing how it all fits together.
Well, think about it like this. If we're clinging to a rigid sense of self, we're less likely to be open to new experiences, right? We're filtering everything through that fixed lens of who we think we are.
And that limits our choices too, doesn't it?
Right.
Because we're only choosing things that align with that fixed self.
Exactly. But if we can let go of that, if we can embrace ego death, as pasted text puts it, then suddenly we're open to a much wider range of experiences. We can see things from new perspectives, try new things, and make choices that might have seemed impossible before.
So it's like by shedding that old skin, we're actually expanding the possibilities for growth and change.
Precisely. And that's where the cycle really kicks into high gear, because the more open we are to new experiences, the more we learn and grow. And the more we grow, the more our expressions change and evolve, and those new expressions lead to new choices, which lead to even more new experiences.
It's like this amazing upward spiral.
Exactly. It's a positive feedback loop that can lead to incredible transformation.
And the more I think about it, the more I see how this all ties back to the concepts of responsibility and harmony, which, if I remember correctly, are pretty central to the cycle of experience, expression, and choice.
They are. And they're intimately connected to this idea of personal evolution. Because when we understand that we're part of this continuous cycle, we start to see that our choices have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for everyone and everything around us.
So it's not just about our own personal growth, but about how our growth impacts the world.
Exactly. When we embrace the idea of interconnectedness, we realize that our choices ripple outward. And that can be a pretty powerful motivator for making choices that are aligned with harmony and well-being for all.
And it makes that whole idea of ego death even more important, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because if we're stuck in our own little ego bubbles, we're not going to be very aware of how our choices affect others.
Right. It's like we're operating with blinders on. But when we let go of that fixed sense of self, we start to see the bigger picture. We become more compassionate, more empathetic, and ultimately more responsible in our choices.
It's almost like ego death is a prerequisite for true responsibility.
In a way, yeah, because as long as we're clinging to that separate sense of self, we're going to prioritize our own needs and desires above everything else.
Which brings me to something else that Pasted Text mentions. It's a bit of a doozy. The idea that resisting change can lead to physical death as a catalyst for evolution.
Yeah, that one's a bit intense, isn't it? But I think it's important to remember that it's meant to be a metaphor.
A metaphor for what exactly?
Well, think about it. When we resist change, when we cling to the familiar, we're essentially choosing to stagnate. We're not growing, we're not evolving. And in a sense, that's a kind of death. It's a death of potential, a death of possibility.
So it's not about physical death literally, but about the consequences of stagnation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that clinging to the past, refusing to grow, can lead to a kind of living death. We're still breathing, we're still functioning, but we're not truly alive.
That makes sense. And it also makes those small deaths we experience in life, like the endings of relationships or jobs or even beliefs, seem a lot less scary.
Because they're actually opportunities for growth, right? They're forcing us to let go of the old, to make way for the new.
Yeah, I think I'm starting to see that. Even though those experiences can be painful, they can also be incredibly liberating. It's like they're cracking us open, allowing us to become something more.
And those cracks, those moments of breakdown, are often where the most profound growth happens.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, any final takeaways for our listeners? What can we carry with us from all of this?
Well, I think the main thing is to remember that personal evolution is a process, not a destination. It's something we're all engaged in, whether we're conscious of it or not.
And it's not a passive process either.
Right.
We have to participate, we have to make choices, we have to be willing to let go and embrace change.
Exactly. And I think the more we understand about the interconnected nature of experience, expression, and choice, the more skillful we can become at navigating this journey.
And maybe the most important question to ask ourselves is, how can we become more conscious of the choices we're making each day? How can we make sure those choices are aligned with our own growth and the well-being of all?
It's a great question, and I think it's one that each of us has to answer for ourselves.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.